Wonderful indeed.
Killer 7 is a game that I'm not even sure how to describe. It's one of the weirdest games I've ever played. My favorite aspect of it is the amount of disturbing and scary content it has within it. Most people probably don't see it as a horror game, but there's something about it that I just find creepy. The places you explore are completely empty, and the only thing you can find in it is the Heaven Smiles. Also, many of the characters in the game are off-putting and creepy. But in the chapter Encounter, we get introduced to one of the most heinous villains of all time. We first get introduced to this charming lad inside a limo where he blows the other passengers' brains out. He then enters a building and kills even more people. As he exits the building, we get a good look at his smug ass. This has to be the most devious design that I've ever seen on a man. He goes by the name Curtis Blackburn, and he has a long history with the Smith Syndicate. Dan Smith is the member that he spent the most time with. He apparently used to work with him until a man named Pedro Montoya gave Blackburn the impression that Dan betrayed him. This caused a split between the two, and Montoya and Blackburn worked with an organ trafficking unit. Blackburn has been trafficking organs, specifically children's, to facilitate the Smiles. The Smith Syndicate are sent off to an off-putting carnival place to track Curtis down, but you don't really run into him in this level. At some point the player will encounter Travis, who lets us in on some of his freaky hobbies. So on top of being an organ trafficker, he's also a weirdo that lives with female orphans. This guy puts Diddy and Epstein to shame. At the end of Encounter 1, we end up finding Ayame Blackburn, who is Curtis Blackburn's quote-unquote daughter. She's actually one of the girls that Curtis spared from the organ trafficking and decided to train her as an assassin instead. I've always found her more interesting because not much of it is explained outside of her backstory. I would like to know the significance behind her being a freaking anime character for one. Anyways, you end up beating her and she just leaves in a bus. It sounds like a bus full of kids, and I think that this is some of the organ trafficking victims for Curtis. Encounter 2 starts off with Blackburn taking revenge on Pedro for betraying him. He reveals that he killed Pedro's family, and it's implied that he raped his wife too. Pedro gets shot in the back of the head after reuniting with his daughter in a morbid way. Every second that this guy is on screen, he is the most evil and scary bastard on the planet. This time, the Smiths head to Blackburn's residence. This section has an oddly calming music track to it, but there's an underlying scary ambience to all of it. As you venture through the mansion, you'll eventually encounter Ayame again, but this time we put her down for good. This is probably the only person that you kill throughout this game that I feel sorry for. She was basically groomed into that lifestyle, and it's just tragic if you think about it. At the end of the level, you'll enter a laboratory where Curtis Blackburn is waiting for your arrival. You're forced to play as Dan in this part, which leads to a pretty tense shootout between them. This room, by the way, is where Blackburn takes the organs out of his victims. You have to shoot Blackburn as the pigeon flies off his shoulder. The pigeon will often fake you out, and the electronic sound effects also change during the fight. It's relatively simple for a boss fight, but it's still great and effective. After shooting him a couple times, he collapses and gets gutted by his own machine. It's still not over as Dan exits the room and we can see a row of girls hanging on both sides like taxidermy. You may have killed him, but the deaths of his victims will never go away. I think that there's also a little depth to his character. He can reappear as a remnant psyche where he states that he was longing for deaths. Other things he says like shedding light on his life and life is wonderful indeed makes me question his motives. He's like a man that was trying to find meaning in what he was doing, but got in too deep to get himself out. Either way, he goes down in gaming history as one of the most dreadful villains ever created. If you would like to support me, I have a Redbubble link down in the description and bio. Also, I have social media pages on Instagram, Twitter, DeviantArt, Kara, and much more. Thanks for watching.